The quiet hum of machinery filled the Zilani Coalition monitoring station as another ordinary night shift began. Communications Officer Hyanwu sipped his bitter coffee and watched the endless stream of data flowing across his screens. For 3 years, he had monitored the Outer Rim territories, listening to merchant chatter, weather reports, and the occasional distress beacon from stranded cargo ships. Tonight felt different. A weak signal penetrated the static. Barely strong, enough to register on his equipment. Hyanwu frowned and adjusted the frequency, trying to clean up the transmission. The universal translator struggled with the alien language patterns, producing garbled fragments that made no sense. Then the words became clear. Please, anyone. Our children are dying, Hyanwu's coffee cup slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor. The voice belonged to a species he had never encountered before, but the desperation was unmistakable. He quickly recorded the transmission and began running it through advanced translation protocols. The Ethon species, crystalline beings from the distant Kepler sector. Their message painted a horrifying picture of systematic genocide. We are a peaceful people, the transmission continued. We have no weapons, no armies. We study the stars and tend our crystal gardens, but they came from the darkness, ships like Black Death. The Vorthok Empire shows no mercy. They burn our cities and harvest our people. The signal flickered, threatening to disappear entirely. Hyanwu worked frantically to boost the reception, his hands shaking as he realized he was listening to an entire civilization's death cry. Our homeworld of Ithonia is gone. 7 colony worlds have fallen silent. We estimate 2 billion of our kind have perished. The Vorthok take our crystals and leave only ash. We broadcast on all frequencies, hoping someone will hear. Someone must hear. Captain Minho arrived at the station within minutes of Hyanwu's emergency alert. The grizzled veteran had seen many conflicts during his 40-year career, but nothing had prepared him for the raw footage accompanying the Ethon transmission. The images were devastating. Beautiful crystal cities that had taken centuries to grow were reduced to melted slag. Ethon families, their bodies resembling living gemstones, lay scattered across scorched earth. The Vorthok ships moved like mechanical predators, methodically, destroying everything in their path. How long do they have? Minho asked quietly. Hyanwu checked the star charts. Based on the Vorthok fleet movements, maybe weeks. They're heading toward the last 3 Ethon colonies. After that, He didn't need to finish the sentence. Minho immediately contacted Coalition Command. Within hours, the Emergency Council convened on the capital world of Zelanos. The debate was heated, but brief. The Coalition had advanced medical technology, faster than light communication, and the finest universities in the galaxy. What they lacked was military power. We are healers and teachers, Council Leader Suravel explained to the assembled delegates. We have no warships, no weapons capable of stopping an empire that has conquered dozens of star systems. The Ethon transmission played on loop in the background, their dying voices pleading for intervention that might never come. The Coalition had the moral obligation to help but lacked the means to act. The council chamber fell silent as the terrible reality sank in. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, an entire species was being erased from existence. The galaxy's most advanced peaceful civilization could only watch it happen. Ambassador Ji-Hai stared at the classified files spread across her desk, mind racing through impossible options. The Ethon distress signals continued to flood in, each one weaker than the last. The Coalition Council had spent 3 days debating, but every military advisor reached the same conclusion. They simply didn't have the firepower to challenge the Vorthok Empire. But there was one option nobody wanted to discuss. The Sol system sat in the galactic quarantine zone, marked with warning beacons that had kept ships away for 37 years. The humans of Earth had been isolated since their first contact incident, when a simple trade negotiation had turned into a bloodbath. The galaxy still whispered about what happened to the Krillian delegation that day. Or animals, Council Leader Siraval had said during the morning session. Deathworld savages who solve every problem with violence. Jahai pulled up the Classified reports from that first contact. The Krillians had tried to intimidate the humans during trade talks, showing footage of their military conquests. They expected the primitive Earthlings to submit immediately. Instead, the human negotiators had calmly asked for a recess, then returned with what they called proportional evidence. The humans had somehow hacked every Krillian ship in the system within 20 minutes. Their screens displayed detailed schematics of Krillian worlds, invasion plans for Earth, and a countdown timer. The message was clear: attack us, and we'll turn your home planets into glass. The Krillians had fled in terror, spreading stories throughout the galaxy about humanity's terrifying capabilities. The quarantine had been established not to protect the galaxy from humans, but to prevent any species from provoking them again. Now Jihai found herself preparing to break that quarantine. Her fingers hesitated over the communication array. Opening a channel to Earth would violate every treaty the Coalition had signed. But the Ethons were dying, and sometimes desperate times called for desperate measures. The transmission pierced the void between stars. Carrying her plea toward the forbidden blue world, Lieutenant Seung-min was finishing his night shift at the Luna monitoring station when the incoming signal triggered every alarm in the facility. His coffee went cold as he watched the message decode on his screen. The Coalition's desperation was obvious from the first few lines, but it was the attached files that made his blood run cold. The Ethon footage showed crystal beings fleeing through burning cities. Children no bigger than his nephew cowered in underground shelters, while Vorthok ships rained death from above. The images reminded him of old history lessons about Earth's darkest chapters. When stronger nations had crushed weaker ones without mercy, Seung-min had grown up on stories his grandfather told about the old wars, how humans had once turned on each other with devastating efficiency, how they had learned from those mistakes and sworn never to let such horrors happen again. But now, watching another species face extinction, those old instincts stirred. His hands shook as he forwarded the transmission to Earth Command. Within minutes, his secure terminal chimed with an incoming priority message. General Quan Ho's face appeared on screen, his expression grim. "How many Ethons are left?" Asked without preamble. "Intelligence estimates may be 50 million across 3 remaining colonies," Seung-min replied. "Sir, the footage shows they're completely defenseless. They don't even have basic weapons." The general's jaw tightened. "Prepare a full briefing. Package. I'm calling an emergency session of the Defense Council." As the transmission ended, Seung-min looked back at the Ethon distress calls still flooding his screens. Ambassador Jihei's plea for help had reached Earth, but she probably had no idea what she had just unleashed. The galaxy was about to learn why humans had been quarantined in the first place. The emergency session began at 0300 hours, Earth Standard Time. President Dayoon had been pulled from her sleep by the most urgent security alert in decades. The underground bunker beneath Geneva buzzed with activity as military leaders, intelligence officials, and diplomatic advisors gathered around the holographic display table. General Quan Ho stood at the center, his weathered face illuminated by the ghostly blue light of the projector. The images from the Kepler sector painted a story of systematic extermination that made even hardened veterans sick to their stomachs. "The Vorthok Empire has been hunting the Ethons for 8 months," he began, his voice steady despite the horror. On screen, they target civilian populations first, then harvest the crystal formations that make up Ethon cities. Intelligence suggests they use these crystals to power their war machines. Admiral Jae-soon leaned forward, studying the tactical displays. At 62, he had spent his entire career preparing for threats that never materialized. The quarantine had kept Earth safe, but it had also left humanity restless and ready for a fight that seemed would never come. "What's their military capability?" President Dayoon asked. "The Vorthok. Substantial, but predictable," replied Intelligence Director Minsu. "They rely on overwhelming firepower and numerical superiority, standard tactics, minimal innovation. They've never faced serious resistance, and the Ethons. Pacifists by nature and philosophy," Minsu continued. they've never developed weapons technology. Their entire civilization is built around art, science, and peaceful coexistence. They're essentially defenseless. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, an entire species was being hunted to extinction while the galaxy watched helplessly. President Do-yoon studied the faces around the table. These were people who had trained their entire lives for moments like this, but 37 years of isolation had left them uncertain about Earth's role in galactic affairs. "What does the Coalition want from us?" she asked. "Military intervention," General Kwanho replied. "They're requesting immediate deployment of combat forces to the Kepler sector." Defense Secretary Hae-won shook her head. "We have no legal authority to intervene in galactic conflicts. The quarantine agreements specifically prohibit military action outside our solar system. Since when do we let paperwork stop us from doing what's right?" Admiral Jae-sung's voice cut through the political discussion like a blade. He stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I've read the reports. I've seen the footage. These crystal people are being slaughtered like animals, and we're sitting here talking about legal authority." The Admiral's fist crashed onto the conference table, making everyone jump. "We don't abandon the innocent, not when we have the power to help." President Do-yoon raised her hand for silence. "Admiral, what exactly are you proposing?" A full military response. "We deploy the Third Fleet to the Kepler sector and put an end to this genocide." The Third Fleet. Defense Secretary Hae-won looked shocked. "That's experimental technology. Half those ships are still in testing phases." Admiral Jae-soon's smile was cold. "Then it's time for a field test." Within minutes, the vote was unanimous. Earth would break its isolation and enter the galactic stage not as diplomats or traitors, but as warriors responding to a cry for help. The orders went out immediately. Hidden bases throughout the solar system came alive with activity. Ships that had been concealed in asteroid fields for decades began powering up their engines. Crews who had drilled endlessly for a war that might never come suddenly found themselves preparing for humanity's first interstellar conflict. The galaxy had spent 37 years wondering what humans were really capable of. They were about to find out. The space around Ethon Prime had been quiet for 3 days. The Vorthok 47th Conquest Fleet floated in perfect formation, their massive dreadnoughts casting shadows across the dying crystal world below. Fleet Commander Zekthal reviewed the final harvest reports with satisfaction. 2 more days and they would strip the last valuable crystals from this pathetic planet. The Ethons had stopped transmitting their desperate pleas for help. Good Zekthal found their crying annoying. That's when reality tore open. The first sign was a ripple in space itself, like looking at the bottom of a pond through disturbed water. Then came the flash of exotic energy that made every Vorthok sensor array scream warnings. Where empty space had existed moments before, 12 human warships now hung in perfect attack formation. Captain So-young stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, watching her tactical display update with enemy positions. The experimental jump drives had worked flawlessly, delivering her battle group directly into the heart of Vorthok space. The enemy fleet was spread out in a harvesting formation, completely unprepared for combat. "All ships, this is Retribution." Actual, she broadcast on an open channel. "Remember, we're not here to play fair. We're here to end this." The Vorthok response was predictably arrogant. Fleet Commander Zekthal's face appeared on the main screen, his reptilian features twisted. With contempt? "Primitive mammals," he hissed. "You dare interrupt the great work of the Vorthok Empire? We have conquered 47 star systems. We will add your pathetic worlds to our collection." Captain So-young's reply was a smile that would have terrified anyone who knew human history. "You picked the wrong species to threaten." The UES Retribution opened fire. What followed defied everything the Vorthok knew about space combat. Their military doctrine was based on massive ships trading long-range fire until one side broke. Humans fought like they were still hunting prey. In Earth's ancient forests, Commander Taeho's stealth frigates materialized inside the Vorthok formation like ghosts. The U.S. Shadow Strike and her sister ships had been invisible to enemy sensors, using technology that bent light and gravity around their hulls. They struck supply vessels and command ships with surgical precision. Crippling the enemy's ability to coordinate, the Vorthok tried to respond with their standard tactics. But humans didn't follow the rules of civilized warfare, where other species would engage in honorable ship-to-ship combat. Humans swarmed like angry hornets. Major Hajin led the first boarding action against a Vorthok heavy cruiser. Her Marines used breaching pods that punched through enemy armor like bullets through paper. The Vorthok crew expected hand-to-hand combat in their corridors. But humans had brought something worse: psychological warfare. The human Marines moved through the ship, playing recordings of Ethon death cries at maximum volume. They left behind holographic projections showing the burned crystal cities. Some Vorthok crew members simply stopped fighting and curled up in corners, their minds unable to process the guilt and horror. "This is what you did to innocents," Haijin's voice echoed through the ship's speakers. "This is what happens when you pick a fight with humans." Within 6 hours, the Vorthok 47th Conquest Fleet had been reduced to burning wreckage. The few surviving ships fled into hyperspace, carrying terrified reports of an enemy that fought like demons. Fleet Commander.
Yes.
Sekthal's final transmission to Vorthok High Command was barely coherent. They're not like other species. They don't fight for territory or resources. They fight for revenge, and they're very, very good at it. Captain Soyoung watched the enemy retreat with grim satisfaction. The first phase was complete, but this was just the beginning. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when humans decided to go to war. The Vorthok High command chamber erupted in chaos as reports flooded in from across the Empire. Fleet Commander Zekthal's transmission had been playing on repeat for hours, his terrified voice describing an enemy that fought like nothing in their military databases. Supreme, or leader. Vexstar slammed his clawed fist on the command throne. For 300 years, the Vorthok Empire had swept across the galaxy, crushing every species that dared oppose them. No primitive civilization had ever posed a real threat to their military might. "Impossible," he snarled at his advisors. "Single star system cannot defeat our conquest fleets. Send the reserve armadas. Show these mammals what real power looks like." Within days, the largest Vorthok fleet in history assembled at the edge of human space. 500 warships, including the massive dreadnought Worldbreaker, prepared to reduce Earth to ash. The fleet was commanded by War Admiral Kexmore, a veteran who had personally overseen the destruction of 12 civilizations. "We will make an example of this species," Kexmore declared to his captains. "Their homeworld will burn as a warning to any who dare challenge Vorthok supremacy." But Fleet Admiral Dong-wook had been expecting them, hidden in the asteroid field. Of the outer system, the human Third Fleet waited in perfect silence. Their ships were powered down, invisible to conventional sensors. Watching as the Vorthok Armada approached, Earth like a slow-moving storm of death, Dong-Wook had studied every piece of intelligence about Vorthok tactics. They relied on overwhelming firepower and numerical superiority, expecting their enemies to meet them in traditional battle formations. What they didn't understand was that humans had spent 37 years preparing for exactly this moment. "All ships maintain stealth protocols," Dong-wook whispered into his comm system. "Let them get close. Let them think they're winning." The Vorthok fleet entered Earth's outer system with all the subtlety of a meteor shower. Their massive dreadnoughts moved in perfect formation, energy weapons charging for the bombardment that would end human civilization forever. That's when they learned their first lesson about fighting humans. Never assume you understand their technology. The UES Darwin's Revenge was Captain Eugen's masterpiece, a bioship that represented humanity's most advanced engineering. From the outside, it looked like a living organism floating in space, its hull rippling with organic patterns that pulsed with their own heartbeat. The Vorthok sensors couldn't even classify it as a ship. "What is that thing?" or Admiral Kexmore demanded as his scanners detected the strange vessel moving toward his fleet. His answer came in the form of concentrated plasma fire from 50 Vorthok ships. The energy beams struck the bioship's hull and simply disappeared. The living vessel's skin absorbed the attack like a sponge, surface glowing brighter with each impact. Captain Eugen smiled as she felt her ship's excitement through the neural link. The Darwin's revenge was hungry, and the Vorthok had just provided it with a feast. "Return the favor," she whispered. The bioship's response was devastating. Every joule of energy it had absorbed from the Vorthok weapons came back as a focus beam that cut through 3 enemy cruisers like butter. But that was just the beginning. The ship began to change, its hull adapting to the Vorthok weapons in real time. Armor plating shifted and reformed, creating perfect defenses against energy weapons. New weapon systems grew from its surface like flowers blooming in fast forward. It's learning, War Admiral Kexmore, science officer, reported in horror. The ship is adapting to our attacks faster than we can modify them. Around the bioship, the rest of the human fleet revealed itself. Ships that had been invisible moments before materialized like ghosts. Their AI systems already analyzing Vorthok weaknesses and adjusting their tactics accordingly. The Vorthok found themselves fighting an enemy that evolved during battle, becoming stronger with each exchange of fire. Their assumptions about human technology crumbled along with their fleet. The Coalition. Diplomatic vessel Peaceful Dawn. Docked with the massive human command ship in the ruins of what had once been the Vorthok's Third Fleet, Ambassador Subin stepped through the airlock with trembling hands, still processing the destruction she had witnessed during her approach. Entire Vorthok battle stations floated as twisted metal sculptures. Supply depots burned in the void like dying stars. The humans had carved through the enemy's defensive line in just 4 days, leaving nothing but wreckage in their wake. The corridors of the humanity's wrath buzzed with activity. Human crew members moved with deadly efficiency, their faces showing no emotion as they coordinated the systematic destruction of an entire empire. Subin had never seen anything like it in her 40 years of diplomatic service. Admiral Rugin received her in his ready room, a Spartanly decorated space dominated by tactical displays showing the current state of the war. Red markers indicated destroyed Vorthok positions, while blue arrows showed the relentless advance of human forces. Admiral Subin began carefully. "The Coalition Council has sent me to discuss the escalation of hostilities." Wu Jin's expression didn't change. At 55, he had spent decades studying military history, learning from humanity's own dark past. He understood the price of half measures when fighting genocidal enemies. "Escalation," he repeated. "Ambassador, we're simply responding to the situation as we found it." Subin pulled up holographic displays showing the latest intelligence. Reports. "In the past week, your forces have destroyed 17 Vorthok colonies, disabled their primary shipyards, and blockaded their home system. The Coalition is concerned about the intensity of your response. Are you concerned about our methods or our effectiveness?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Subin had watched the footage of human raids on Vorthok worlds. The attacks were precise, targeting only military installations and infrastructure. No civilian casualties, no unnecessary destruction. But the sheer scale of the offensive was terrifying. "The galaxy is watching," she said finally. "Species that view humans as dangerous because of your aggressive nature. This campaign is confirming their worst fears." Admiral Wu Jin stood and walked to the observation window. Outside, the wreckage of Vorthok ships drifted in the starlight, silent monuments to military overconfidence. "Let me tell you about proportional response," he said quietly. "When the Vorthok decided to exterminate the Ethons, they crossed a line. They chose genocide as a military tactic. They turned the systematic murder of innocents into policy." Turned back to Subin, his eyes cold as space itself. "So we responded proportionally. They chose extinction for another species. Now they face extinction themselves. But surely there's room for negotiation," Subin pressed. "The Coalition could mediate peace talks. End this before it goes too far." "It went too far the moment they started burning crystal cities," Wu Jin replied. "The Vorthok had 3 opportunities to surrender. They chose to fight. Now they face the consequences." Subin's diplomatic training kicked in. "Admiral, what you're describing sounds like total war, the complete destruction of their..." Civilization. Exactly. Wu Jin's response was matter of fact. They demonstrated what they're capable of when they have power. We can't allow that capability to survive. The communication system chimed with an incoming report. Captain Dongsu's voice filled the room. Admiral Vorthok Home Fleet has been engaged. Enemy forces are retreating toward their capital world. Understood. Maintain pursuit. No prisoners. Subin felt a chill run down her spine. Admiral, the Coalition cannot support this level of ... thoroughness. Then the Coalition should have acted when the Ethons first called for help, Wu Jin replied. You had months to intervene. You chose to debate while innocents died. Now you complain because we chose to act. The truth of his words was undeniable. The Coalition had possessed the moral authority to help, but lacked the will to use force. Now, they watched in horror as humans demonstrated what decisive action looked like. The galaxy will remember this, Subin warned. Good Admiral Wu Jin said simply. Maybe next time, they'll think twice before choosing genocide. The Vorthok homeworld of Vorthkala hung in space like a diseased eye. Its surface covered in massive industrial complexes that stretched from pole to pole. For 3,000 years, this world had been the beating heart of an empire that had consumed entire civilizations. Now it trembled as human fleets closed in from all directions. Admiral Kyung-ho stood in the command center of the EU's eternal vigilance, watching the final pieces of his campaign fall into place. 3 months of warfare had stripped away every Vorthok defense, every fleet, every stronghold. Now only the homeworld remained, defended by their most desperate forces. Final intelligence report, Admiral Commander Heron announced. Long-range scans confirm what we suspected. The entire Vorthok population is connected through quantum neural networks. They're not just a military force, they're a single massive organism. The revelation explained everything. How the Vorthok had coordinated their genocidal campaigns across dozens of star systems, how they had maintained perfect unity of purpose while slaughtering billions of innocent beings. They weren't individual soldiers making moral choices. They were cells in a vast, malevolent organism. Sir Intelligence Officer Minho added, We've detected massive energy signatures beneath the planet's surface. They're not just hiding there. Population down there. They're protecting something much more important. The tactical display updated with new information. Deep beneath Worthkalar's crust lay a massive biological structure, pulsing with exotic energy. It was the source of the hive mind's power, the central nervous system, that connected every Vorthok across the galaxy. The Queen Mind, Admiral Kyun-cho, said quietly, We've been fighting symptoms. That's the disease itself, the final battle. For Vorthkala was unlike anything in human military history. The Vorthok defenders fought with suicidal fury, their ships diving directly into human formations without regard for survival. They knew that defeat here meant the end of their species, but humans had learned something important during their quarantine years, sometimes. The only way to stop a monster is to become something even more dangerous. Captain Duhayan received the classified orders aboard the science vessel at U.S. Quantum Edge. The ship had been designed for one purpose, too. Deploy humanity's most terrifying weapon against enemies that conventional arms couldn't reach. Protocol Omega is authorized. Admiral Kyung-ho's voice came through the secure channel. Target the Queen Mind. End this. Duhayan had studied the weapon specifications for years, but never expected to use it. Protocol Omega was designed to attack consciousness itself, to sever the quantum connections that allowed the Vorthok hive mind to function. It would leave them alive, but disconnected millions of individuals suddenly forced to think for themselves. All stations, prepare for deployment, Duhayan ordered. This is for the Ethons. This is for every species they've murdered. The asterisk, quantum. Edge asterisk dropped out of hyperspace directly above the Vorthok homeworld. Enemy fire erupted from the surface, but the ship's experimental shielding held. Duhayan felt the weight of galactic history as his finger hovered over the activation switch. Weapon charged and ready, reported his science officer. Targeting the Queen Mind's neural core. Fire. The weapon itself was invisible, a stream of quantum particles that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The massive biological structure beneath Vorthkaler's surface convulsed as the neural disruptor tore through its consciousness. Across the galaxy, every Vorthok suddenly found themselves alone inside their own minds for the first time in their species' history. The unified voice that had commanded their empire for millennia fell silent. Ships stopped mid-flight as their crews struggled to understand individual thought. The hive mind that had terrorized the galaxy for 3,000 years died in a single moment, leaving behind millions of confused individuals who had never learned to think for themselves. Admiral Kung Ho watched the energy readings from the Queen Mine flatline. "It's over," he announced to his fleet. "The Vorthok Empire is finished." But the silence that followed felt heavier than victory. Humanity had won, but at the cost of becoming something that would haunt the galaxy's nightmares for generations to come. The silence that followed the collapse of the Vorthok hive mind was unlike anything the galaxy had ever experienced. 3,000 years? The Empire's unified voice had echoed across star systems, coordinating conquest and genocide. Now, millions of individual Vorthok found themselves alone with their own thoughts for the first time in their species' history. On the surface of Vorthkalar, former soldiers wandered aimlessly through the ruins of their cities. Without the Queen Mind's guidance, they struggled to understand basic concepts like hunger, fear, and confusion. Many simply sat down and stared at the sky, overwhelmed by the sudden burden of individual consciousness. Commander, Hay-1's engineering corps arrived 3 days after the final battle. The human officer stood in the command center of the relief ship New Dawn, watching footage of the devastated world below. Her orders were simple: establish refugee camps and begin humanitarian aid operations. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Junho reported, "we're detecting approximately 2 million Vorthok survivors on the surface. Most appear to be in shock. They're not responding to our communication attempts." Hay-1 nodded grimly.
Yes.
They've never had to think for themselves before. "Start with basic needs: food, water, shelter. We'll figure out the rest as we go." First human medical teams to land on Vorthkaler witnessed scenes that would haunt them forever. Vorthk civilians, their reptilian features twisted with confusion, huddled in groups without speaking. Some had injured themselves trying to perform tasks that required coordination they no longer possessed. Dr. Sungwoo, the mission's chief medical officer, worked alongside his team to establish triage centers. "They're not physically damaged," he explained to his staff. "Psychologically, they're like newborns. 3,000 years of collective consciousness don't disappear overnight." Meanwhile, in the Kepler sector, a different kind of miracle was taking place. The surviving Ethons emerged from their underground shelters to find human construction crews working to rebuild their crystal cities. The sight of their former enemies' destroyers now helping restore their world left many refugees speechless. Crystalline, being Luxera, approached Captain Minsu's engineering team with hesitation. Her translucent form sparkled with emotions that humans were only beginning to understand. "Why do you help us?" she asked through the universal translator. "Your species is known for warfare. We expected conquest, not compassion." Captain Minsu paused his work on the foundation of a new crystal spire. "We fight when we have to. We build when we can. The war is over. Now it's time to heal." The reconstruction efforts revealed humanity's true nature to the watching galaxy. The same species that had systematically dismantled the Vorthok Empire now worked 18-hour shifts to restore damaged worlds. Human doctors treated both Ethon, refugees, and former Vorthok soldiers with equal care. Admiral Kung Ho established his temporary headquarters on the Ethon colony, world of Prism Gate. The crystal structures that had once housed millions of peaceful beings were slowly being regrown. With human technological assistance, the process was delicate, requiring both advanced engineering and artistic sensitivity. "The Ethons are artists," he explained to Coalition Ambassador Su Ben during her visit. "Their cities aren't just buildings, they're living sculptures that take centuries to mature. We're not just rebuilding their homes, we're helping restore their culture." The galaxy watched in fascination as human behavior defied every expectation. Species that had assumed humans were savage conquerors saw them sharing food with hungry refugees. Military vessels that had struck terror into Vorthok fleets now distributed medical supplies to former enemies, but it was the work being done with individual Vorthok that truly amazed observers. Human psychologists and therapists worked patiently with former HiveMind members, teaching them how to make personal decisions and form individual relationships. "They're not evil," Dr. Sung-woo explained in his reports to Earth Command. "They're victims of their own biology. The Queen Mind made all their choices for them. Now they have to learn how to be people." The rehabilitation centers established by human forces became laboratories for understanding consciousness itself. Former Vorthok soldiers learned to paint, write poetry, form friendships activities that had been impossible under the hive mind's control. The galaxy began to understand that humanity's capacity for destruction was matched only by their determination to heal what had been broken. The Great Assembly Hall on Zelanos had never hosted such a momentous gathering. Representatives from over 300 species filled the crystalline chambers, their varied forms creating a living mosaic of galactic civilization. At the center of it all stood Coalition Supreme Chancellor Varathan, her ancient features bearing the weight of a decision that would reshape the galaxy. Ambassador Inho sat in the human delegation section, still adjusting to the attention focused on his species. 6 months ago, humanity had been quarantined pariahs. Now they were being offered a seat at the most powerful political body in known space. "The events of the past year have forced us to reconsider many assumptions, Chancellor," Varathon began, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. "The Vorthok Empire terrorized the galaxy for 3 millennia. In 6 months, humanity reduced them to individual refugees learning to think for themselves." Murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates. Some species still whispered about the terrifying efficiency of human warfare. Others spoke of the remarkable compassion shown during the reconstruction efforts. "But it is not just their military capability that impresses us," the Chancellor continued. "It is their principle. When the Ethons called for help, every other species calculated the cost. Humans simply asked, 'How can we help?' Ambassador Inho stood as his name was called. The chamber fell silent, hundreds of alien eyes focusing on the representative of the species that had just rewritten the rules of galactic politics. "The Coalition Council formally invites humanity to join as a permanent member," Chancellor Varathon announced. "Your species has proven that strength and compassion can coexist. We need that balance on the Council." Ginho looked around the chamber, seeing hope and fear in equal measure. The galaxy wanted humanity's protection, but they also feared what that protection might cost. "We accept," he said simply, "but with conditions." The chamber erupted in surprised chatter. No species had ever imposed conditions on council membership. "Humanity will join the Galactic Council," Inho continued. "But we will not be bound by bureaucratic delays when innocent lives are at stake. If another species faces genocide, we will act first and discuss politics later." Chancellor Varathon's translator struggled with the concept. "You mean ... unilateral military action? You mean doing what's right, regardless of the paperwork involved?" Debate that followed lasted for hours. Some species demanded restrictions on human military actions. Others argued that humanity's willingness to act was exactly what the galaxy needed. In the end, pragmatism won. The Human Defense Accords were signed 3 days later in a ceremony broadcast across the galaxy. The document established Earth as the unofficial protector of peaceful species, with the authority to intervene in cases of genocide or systematic oppression. Ambassador Inho's closing statement became legendary. "To those who would prey on the innocent, understand this. The galaxy is no longer defenseless. Humanity stands ready to answer every call for help, regardless of distance, politics, or personal cost. We hope you choose peace, but if you choose war, you will face us." The message resonated across known space. Aggressive species that had been planning conquests quietly abandoned their ambitions. The Zelani Coalition reported a 90% decrease in interstellar conflicts within the first month. But it was the smaller changes that truly mattered. The Ethons returned to their rebuilt crystal cities, their art more beautiful than ever. Former Vorthok individuals established their own settlements, learning to create instead of destroy. Refugee camps became permanent colonies, where former enemies worked together to build new lives. The galaxy had learned two important lessons. First, that bullies would always find someone stronger eventually. Second, that humans possessed both, the will and the capability to ensure that someone stronger would always stand with the victims. The age of unopposed conquest was over. The age of human protection had begun, 6 months after a desperate transmission from dying crystal beings. The galaxy had found its guardians, and those guardians had made it clear that they would never again allow innocence to face extinction alone. The Ethons had begged for help. Humanity had answered with total war, total victory, and total commitment to ensuring it never happened again.